Hi everyone, and welcome to the Reproductive System Lab. So our objectives, as you've come to expect them, are located on a Canvas site. So you're going to be responsible for identifying structures on the models. You'll need to explain the events occurring in the ovary and uterus during the menstrual cycle, and I have a video of that below using the menstrual cycle plaque. Be able to identify and distinguish microscopic images, again, key terms, prefixes, and suffixes. And as far as these explanations go, it's really not going to be large. These are mostly fill in the blank kind of things on these practicals. So there's or practicals on these quizzes. So these are all short answer kinds of things. Okay, so with that being said, let me click on the lab manual, and so you can get an idea of what that looks like. So that will bring you to our lab manual, which is the same kind of format as you've seen. So there's an introduction, a little bit of information about what's going on in the female reproductive system. Again, our objectives, prefixes and suffixes, key terms. So you can see all those. So the models, a list of terms or structures that you need to know, the models that they would be on. Again, if you're in person, you're more than welcome to check them out. Otherwise, you'll be using labeled images to identify the different structures. I'm just going to scroll down. You are going to find a lot of repetition, by the way, in the models because we'll have various models both in the reproductive system and then even in development. There'll be more, because it's hard to talk about development without talking about the female reproductive system. So you'll see a lot of what is covered in this section repeated again in development. And then in this section, we have different models or plaques on the events that are going on in the uterus. So you'll see a lot of the same terms just repeated, okay? Okay, but that being said, microscopic anatomy, the first slide would be of the ovary. And what you see are these terms. You'll notice follicles are common here. And then just that first word changes. And basically, throughout the menstrual cycle, what happens is one of many of these eggs that are in a follicle will mature to be ovulated. So when they are in sort of the resting state, they are in this primordial phase. We're going to skip over this next one. Some of them will mature into a primary follicle. Usually only one of those will get to a secondary follicle phase. So this is all maturation. They're getting kind of larger and larger, and you'll see what that means in a second. Until they are mature or Graafian follicles, and they are in that phase before they are ovulated. Now, as I just mentioned, some of these primary follicles, not all of them become secondary ones. Usually it's only one. The ones that decay, a decaying follicle is called an atretic follicle. That's what that term is. Okay, and then you'll see here in primordial, primary, secondary follicles are made up of the actual egg or the oocyte and follicular cells. Mature follicles are made up of what's known as a secondary oocyte, and then those follicular cells are now the granulosa and theca cells, so they differentiate. We'll see those in a second. And then those mature follicles will also have an antrum, something called the cumulus oophorus, corona radiata, zona pellucida. So let's take a look at those. So here is an image of an ovary. This will be the outside the ovary. So this is the outer border. And as we move sort of down this image, we get toward the medulla. So this is the cortex. So right along the outer edge, you'll see all of these small follicles. Those are all in the primordial phase. Again, as some of these will mature, they become what are known as primary follicles, and then these are these larger secondary follicles. So we'll just zoom in a little bit of that same image. So again, you'll see these primordial follicles here along the very edge. A primary follicle looks fairly similar in size to a primordial one. What I would draw your attention to are the follicular cells surrounding it. Like here on these primordial follicles, you barely even see those cells. As we get to the primary follicle, you'll notice they take on a cuboidal shape. So that's how you know you have a primary follicle. And then once those follicular cells become even thicker than that, and even that oocytes becomes larger. Now we know we are in a secondary follicle. Okay, so here's just a closer view of that. So again, here are these primordial ones. You don't really even see the follicular cells around the border. Primary follicle you do. Here's that secondary follicle. Here's that oocyte. You'll notice this blue ring is now called the zona pellucida. This grouping of cells surrounding that is called the corona radiata. And then this space here, all this white space, is called the antrum. And any of this sort of like grainy, pinky purple kind of stuff, that's actually fluid that is filling the antrum, or that space. An atretic follicle looks like that. It kind of looks either smushed, or even sometimes it may look like it kind of looks like a rubber band to me. So here's just some more pictures, primordial follicles. Again, this is a primary follicle. There's the oocyte as well as the cells. Here's a secondary follicle. Again, here's a primary oocyte. And then what I tried to do here is what is highlighted in sort of this purpley blue. Those are the granulosa cells. And then what's in this sort of yellowish green, those are the theca cells. So those follicular cells by now have differentiated into granulosa and theca cells. Now we get to mature follicle. So now you see there's the oocyte, there's that zona pellucida, corona radiata. Look at how large that antrum now is. It's a very, very, very large antrum. So these are now mature follicles. That's how you'll be able to tell. You'll also notice this labeled image of a corpus albicans. That's what's left over after ovulation. Well, a couple steps after ovulation. We'll get there too. But since it's labeled here, I'll just point it out to you. Here's another one up in this corner. So again, it tried to do the same thing where I kept the colors the same. So granulosa cells are blue, theca cells in that greenish color. That cumulus oophorus, now it's not just the corona radiata, but now there's a cloud of cells around the oocyte. So that's called the cumulus oophorus. Okay, and then so getting to corpus albicans, what happens after an ovulation? So what is being ovulated or released from the ovary is going to be the oocyte. That means all of this other stuff stays behind, right? Well, it doesn't just stay behind, not do anything. Let's see what the next image is. It becomes something called the corpus luteum, right? So all of these cells, this big, see that? It's like huge. You can't, I couldn't even fit it on like one image, right? It's so big. All of this is a corpus luteum. That's basically these cells that remain behind. They kind of multiply and divide to form this really large corpus luteum structure. The purpose of that is to maintain the uterine lining in case a fertilized egg is there to be implanted. This is, I guess maybe I should put this in reverse order. So right after ovulation, these are those follicular cells. So those granulosa and theca cells remain. Kind of looks like this. This will heal and form this corpus hemorrhagicum, or this sort of bleeding area, what's left after an ovulation, becomes this corpus luteum. And then if that corpus luteum, if there is no fertilized egg to implant, after a period of time, the corpus luteum will degrade into these corpus albicans. Okay, so again, when the oocyte is ovulated, what remains behind those granulosa and theca cells are the corpus hemorrhagicum. You can kind of see, like, you can imagine how that burst and the oocyte was ovulated. These cells will end up forming this corpus luteum. That'll help maintain the uterine lining. And if it cannot, if there's no fertilized egg to implant, it will basically degrade back down into this corpus albicans. Okay, much, much, much smaller. Okay, and then looking then at the uterus, you'll see there are two main layers, is the endometrium and myometrium. In the endometrium, you have these glands. They're going to have simple columnar epithelium in them, and then lots of lamina propria. So that's what you're seeing here. These large structures are uterine glands. All of that space in between them is lamina propria. The tissue type that's making up the borders is simple columnar epithelium. You know you are myometrium when you do not see these glands. If you see these glands, endometrium. no glands. See how it's kind of solid? Myometrium. Right, this is the progravid phase. So again, you'll see all these glands. Wherever you see those, endometrium. Where you do not see them, myometrium. And in this case, it's a little bit of an odd arrangement of the two, but it's not perfectly like straight across or at a diagonal. But this area here where there's no glands, myometrium, where there's glands, endometrium. Okay, moving on to the male then, the first organ is going to be the testes. These are the different structures and cells that we will see in this organ. So first of all, the first thing is simply that the organ itself is the testis, and each one of these circles, large structures, is part of the seminiferous tubule, so that's a structure. The cells along the very outside are going to be the spermatogonia cells. Again, the cells right along this perimeter, basically make up the very edge. These large cells here, right just inside that perimeter, those are our nurse cells, or sometimes they're called Sertoli cells. They are basically going to help the sperm cells mature. These spermatogonia are the cells that are dividing, or I guess the stem cells for sperm. As these cells divide, the cell that is divided will continue toward the lumen of the seminiferous tubule, and it kind of starts off somewhat, I guess, cuboidal in shape, and then part of what the job of these nurse cells is going to be is to help shape that cell into sort of that typical sperm cell kind of shape. So any of these cells here in the middle, so again, not along the edge, not just right inside, these are simply sperm cells or spermatocytes. And then once it has a fully developed tail, it is considered a sperm cell. Otherwise, it's just a spermatocyte. It's like a potential sperm cell. And then you'll have cells that are in between these seminiferous tubules. Those are simply called interstitial cells. And this is just another more zoomed in image of that. From the testes, the sperm cells will travel to the epididymis. The main things that you need to know is one, that it is the epididymis, that the cells are pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and that these cells have something called stereocilia. So again, there's lots of little tubes in the epididymis. And let's see, normally you can kind of see this, but there's these little hairs that are extending into the lumen. Those are the stereocilia. It's a little bit more of a zoomed in image so you can see that a little bit better. All those little hairs are the stereocilia. All right, let's take a quick look at the links to the anatomy portion of the model portion of the anatomy. Again, the first link will take us to a Google Drive that has a bunch of labeled images of different models. So you can take a look through those. A lot of these are, so this is another female reproductive system model. It will be very similar to the purple plaque one, which will be similar to another purple plaque one. So there's lots of repetition. Okay, and then there'll be a few different male reproductive system models as well. But again, the structures will all be the same. It'll just look slightly different based on the company that created that model. Then our other link, and let me see if I can adjust the area that's being recorded. The other link will take us to more labeled model images. So it's just a slightly different view of the very similar ones that you saw at the other link. And if you, in this case, I started down. So if you scroll up, it'll take you through some other pictures of the different slides. Okay, so just even more of those same images. All right, so this portion should be fairly straightforward. I do have another video discussing the menstrual cycle plaques that should be helpful to you. And as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.